I might be. Are pretty cool. Is it possible that we are that cool?
I certainly. I mean, we're so cool. We're one of the first panels.
We are one of the first panels.
Yes, of course you are.
We got the. I mean, Steve and Ed are talking.
Do we want to officially begin now, or we've still got some people coming?
We got some. Let's give them another minute to file in here, just to make sure, because I don't want anybody to miss it.
Everybody out there, if you want to come in, please come in.
We have like a seat left. It's cool. No, we got seats. Oh, that's awesome.
Okay.
Now, how much trouble are we gonna have from the peanut gallery over here?
Oh yes.
Make noise, folks.
That was one. And then I go.
Make some noise!
Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness.
Come on in, we don't fight.
Much.
Even though we love Godzilla.
Oh my gosh.
All these people have come here to listen to us. Are they?
Oh my gosh, Daniel.
Are they?
We're at G-Fest. Everybody here is crazy.
Everybody here is the best kind.
I was thinking, all right.
I'm starting.
Yeah, sure. Put this in.
Yeah. You know what?
Well, I want to talk to these wonderful people.
Yeah, we got some of these people.
Okay.
All these lovely.
Yeah, there's lots of seats over there.
There are 3 in this row as
Yeah, we got
well.
seats down here in the front. We got some over here.
3 over here. 2 here.
I can defrag. That's good.
Tori is our usher.
You're not getting paid.
I'm not getting paid, but
She's getting paid. She's getting paid to your love.
This is true. This is true. She's been throwing business cards out.
Yeah. Okay. Are we all settled now?
I think we're
I
good.
didn't see anyone else coming.
Rabble, 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 rabble.
We got more seats up here.
Okay. I think we can officially begin now.
I think we can do this.
Thank you so much.
Gosh, yes, thank you guys. This is awesome.
So first I want to say thank you so much for coming out for this. Well, let's get introductions out of the way.
Let's introduce ourselves.
Yeah, I'm Nathan Marchand.
I'm Daniel DiManna. What are you famous for? My entourage. What are you famous for?
I'm a professional writer. I've got about 6 or 7 books in print right now to my name, including a kaiju novella, and I was formerly one half of Kaijuvision Radio.
That's right.
yeah.
And I am the creator of the perhaps ridiculously ambitious Godzilla Novelization Project.
With jealousy right now. I'm as green as the Hulk with envy, with all the love you're getting.
For those who don't know, the GNP for short is an ongoing creative endeavor on my part. It's just me to translate all of the Japanese Godzilla films into full novelizations and to share them 100% free with any fan that wants to read them. Because I don't want Toho to fill my letterbox with CNPs. They're all archived on my website. I have side projects going on. I want to say I've started maybe 9 or 10 of the books, and I'm alternating chapter by chapter on each one. There's a lot of research that goes into this stuff. Translating the scripts and all this stuff. This is, my entire life's worth of loving Godzilla being poured into this project, and it's really, really cool that so many people apparently know about it. Yes.
Are you translating from the original Japanese?
Yes. They're using the original I'm using the original Japanese text. Yes.
How are you getting the original Japanese?
Okay.
Yeah. We'll answer some questions at the end.
We'll answer questions at the end.
Yeah. If you guys have questions about the panel and things like that, or about what we write.
Yeah. We will have a Q&A.
Definitely.
About 10 minutes or so of Q&A. And by the way, anybody who the first 4 people who get their questions answered during the Q&A session, I have some free Kaijuvision t-shirts to just give out.
Oh.
I have 3 larges and a medium.
The last of the bunch.
The last of the bunch. I'm just trying to get rid of them. So I'll toss them to you when we get to that point. But anyway, so
I just wanted to add on to Dan, since he's not going to do it himself, that it's easy for him to do his project since he's actually been to Toho Studios.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But anyway, the subject of our panel, for those who don't know, is about Shinichi Sekizawa and Takeshi Kimura, who honestly are probably the two most unsung heroes from the Showa Era creative team.
Absolutely true. How many people here have heard their names? Raise your hands. Okay, cool.
Okay, and who else here actually pays attention to screenwriter credits when they watch movies? Because I feel like I'm the weirdo who does.
Look at all, a lot of good stuff. These two gentlemen truly are the unsung heroes. It's really not a stretch to say that for a lot of people here, they wrote your childhood. These gentlemen are responsible for almost the entire breadth of Toho's Showa Era tokusatsu in general. Not just kaiju, not just Godzilla, but they wrote a lot of the screenplays for all of these films. And the really fascinating thing is, they were ridiculously diametrically opposite human beings, and that's one of the things we're going to highlight here is how they approached it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that shocked us in researching for this is there is a criminal lack of scholarship on these guys. There's plenty on Honda and Tsuburaya and all those guys, but nobody talks about these screenwriters. And both of us would argue that they had just as much responsibility for making all of these films the way they are as much as everyone else who worked on them.
They don't get as much credit as the Tsuburayas, the Hondas, and even the Fukudas of the things like that. But you can't have a movie without words coming out of people's mouths, and you can't have a movie without characters, and you can't. And some of these guys even came up with the monsters. Some of the monsters. I mean, King Ghidorah came out of one of these scripts. Literally. That's just one example.
And it's actually really serendipitous that we are doing this panel this year, because if you're going to the Pickwick screenings, half of the movies that are playing this year at G-Fest at the Pickwick are Sekizawa scripts.
Yes.
Godzilla's Revenge, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, and Monster Zero are all Sekizawa scripts.
Yes. That gives you an indication, and actually here...
Let's go to the next slide. We'll show you the filmography.
This is Sekizawa's selected filmography. Look at all of these films. I mean, these are just a highlighting of some of the things he did, and across multiple different things. Yeah, I saw somebody mention Aegon. He wrote Aegon the Atomic Dragon. The first episode of Ultraman.
That surprised me.
The first episode of Ultra Operation #1 was him. And a lot of the Godzilla classics, as you'll see, there's a nice even kind of distribution between Honda and Jun Fukuda films on here, because Sekizawa actually really enjoyed working with Jun Fukuda, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. But there's also some really interesting early stuff, information on like the Fearful Attack of the Flying Saucers, which is a very obscure film.
And recently rediscovered.
Rediscovered.
It was a lost film for the longest time.
Yeah, and he wrote and directed that, and
which is just crazy.
We'll get into that a little bit more, but anything we talk about involving that, I'm just going to name drop John LeMay right now.
Oh yeah.
Because
we owe a lot to
that
John
man.
LeMay.
That man is a blessing to this all the research that went into this. So. There's that.
Just to show you how different they are, when we go to Kimura.
This is Takashi Kimura's some of his films. The other half of the classics list.
Yeah.
Basically.
I saw one source. One source that claimed he also had co-screenwriter credit on Half Human, but I can't confirm that.
That one I wasn't able to confirm, and this all bleeds back into the criminal lack of scholarly work that's been done on these guys, especially in English. There are going to be some gaps as we go through. You'll see, for example, that birthdays and I think maybe the death day of Kimura. We're not quite sure. There's some dispute, and that's just because a lot of this stuff isn't very. It's just not well known in America, and we don't happen to be fluent Japanese, so we didn't get a chance to translate a lot of the stuff, but. We pulled from a lot of different sources to make this research possible. So if there's gaps or anything that we're unsure of, we'll make sure we let you know, because if it's not fact, we don't want to say this is fact. Because we don't need any more weird King Kong ending rumors circulating because of us. We don't want to be those people. We don't want to be those people.
We do not want to be the root of
the root of rumors.
The rumor root.
The rumor root.
Yeah.
It's a coin of. Is that hyphenated?
I think I'm just going to trademark it right now.
Rumor root. Trademark copyright. We're going to start with Sekizawa.
Yeah.
We're going to start with Sekizawa.
These are all the biographical details that we could cull from all of our research.
And again, as you'll see, June 2nd is pretty much nailed down as the date of his birth, but there's a year discrepancy. We're not quite sure if he was born in 1920 or 1921, but we do know that it was on June 2nd and that it was in the Kyoto Prefecture. And
According to IMDb, he would, which I didn't see this anywhere else. It said he was married and had 5 kids.
Yes.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yes, that's the only time I've ever seen that, was just on that one posting. Again, we can't necessarily confirm it, but I don't see why they lie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
But one of the first really important events in Sekizawa's life was he was drafted during the war. He absolutely hated it.
yes,
Despised it.
even more so than probably even Honda, the pacifist. You know what I mean? Like, they were about on equal footing, but Sekizawa was just not built for combat. He was not built to hate. He was just not a hateful man.
Yeah.
And to give him a gun, like, it was rough for him.
But one of the things that because another person we owe a lot to is David Callett.
Absolutely.
Because David Callett's the one guy who's tried investing a lot of scholarship into Sekizawa.
If you're listening out there somewhere, David, oh my God, thanks.
We love you.
We love you, David.
But anyway, but one of the things, the war was a very defining experience, as it was for most people in that generation. And something that we found out is that he had a lot of very strange experiences on islands, because obviously, the Pacific Front, he's going out onto all the islands, and which might explain why islands show up a lot in his screenplays, and bizarre things happening on islands.
Maybe somebody gave him weird berry juice on an island. all of his scripts have weird berry juice. Think about it, man.
A lot of them
do have weird juice. Maybe he was on an island and someone was like, "Here, try this."
Yeah.
And like he woke up a week later and he was like, "Oh God."
Did you see a Godzilla sword? What a trip.
What a trip, yeah.
Yeah, and then one of the things that his war experience did is, because he was so miserable during that. Once the war ended, his philosophy very much became eat, drink, and be merry. His whole deal was that he was going to enjoy life as much as he could. So sounds like he was a really fun guy to be around.
By all accounts, he was a very, Honda spoke very highly of him, working with him. I want to say they were drinking buddies, you know what I mean, after work. And Honda once said of him very famously that Sekizawa was intimately childlike, but in the best way possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's something a lot of Godzilla fans can attest to being.
And one of the things that came out of that also was that he's comparatively apolitical compared to Kimura, which we'll say why that is in a second.
Oh yeah.
But the thing is that Callett had an interesting take on that. This is talking about when you look at his work, at his scripts. But one of the things that Callett brought up was that even though he's apolitical, but his philosophy of eat, drink, and be merry came about in response to the asceticism of Imperial Japan. So his apoliticalness is still political in a way, because it's in response to pre-war Imperial Japan.
Yeah, but it changed him. He came out of the war, and I mean, he was probably a very jolly man before, but the war just completely switched his perspective on things, and he came out of it in much happier person, in a similar way to Honda, who had horrific experiences in the war, and obviously when he was liberated at the end of the war, and he famously walked through Hiroshima, that changed him. So it's amazing that even though Sekizawa wasn't involved with the birth of Godzilla specifically, he did not work on the original film. It's interesting to think that so many of the key players in forming the genre did have very, very dark war experiences, and they came out of it with a worldview that helped them tell these stories. So it links the two together. So it's easy to see why those two would have agreed on that.
So, and then after the war, I'm going to make sure we get through these.
Yeah, let's
we have a lot to cover.
We do.
Interestingly, when he got out of the war, he then went to study to be an animator, which makes sense in a way.
It does.
Especially when you see, I guess, how animated his scripts tend to be. And what was the gentleman?
Osamu Tezuka.
If anyone here is familiar with anime or manga, Tezuka is a name you should know.
Yeah.
He is the grandfather of anime and manga.
I don't think
creator of Astro Boy. Studied with him.
They studied together, and both Kimura and Sekizawa studied with very interesting people.
Yes,
and we'll get to that in a sec. But He ultimately ended up working at Beehive Productions in 1948.
It sounds like a very interesting name.
It does. He was an assistant director in addition to being a writer, and a few years later, his first film was written in 4 days.
That is insane. An entire screenplay in a little more than a weekend?
And that was 5 years after he was hired. It was 1953 when that film came out. That was Profile in the City. It was just this film I sadly have not seen.
I don't even know if you can see it.
I'm not, maybe not here. Maybe not even in Japan, because a couple of Honda's films are weird like that too.
Oh, there's a lot. Any of Honda's non-tokusatsu movies are hard to find.
And then after that was, he decided to try his stab at actually directing, and that's how we get Fearful Attack of the Flying Saucers, which he did for Shin Toho 2 years after Godzilla was born in 1956 specifically. The film, there's not a lot known about Fearful Attack. It's speculated to have been inspired by the Earth vs. the Flying Saucers, which famously has Harryhausen animation. And again, the film disappeared for the longest time and was only recently discovered on it went up for auction on Yahoo, Japan. And then the
print?
Yeah, the print. And the bid shot up, and the guy who was selling it was like, actually, and he pulls it back, and then put it up at like a much higher price. Last I heard from John LeMay again, I'm going to name drop him, because his research on...
Oh, he's here.
Oh, is he in the back? Hey, John, what's up? Hey, John LeMay. Now, the reason that we know this movie exists, I know this movie exists, comes from reading about what John researched on this book, and last I heard it was like somebody was restoring it to release it. So I'd love to see it, because very early Sekizawa, but his most early film that's most pertinent to us would be Varan.
That was his first thing, which I admittedly we're not going to get too deep into it, but admittedly Varan it suffers from a lot of things, but the script is actually pretty sharp, at least the first half. The first half is the part that really feels like Sekizawa, with the sharp dialogue and the character archetypes that we're going to see a lot in his work.
You're going to see a lot of the scientist, and you're going to see the reporter, the girl reporter. You're going to see women in really interesting, strong roles, including reporting. Anybody see Ghidra last night at the theater? He wrote for that film, and Naoko is a very Sekizawa character, and a very Honda character too. But Varan was him cutting his teeth on the genre, basically getting his start. And after that, he moved on, and he didn't just do he got pigeonholed kind of like Honda did into monster pictures and sci-fi, but he also did war dramas, he did comedies, he did romantic films. Anybody here ever see The Big Boss? That one's
not the Bruce Lee movie.
Not that one, but that one's probably his more well-known in Japan, but again, and most American audiences are going to know about that film. But, and Varan is very, I'm a big fan of that film, but in terms of what he would ultimately contribute to the genre, it's embryonic, I would say, in Varan, but Mothra is where it explodes. Mothra is where and we're going to get into more detail on that later, but just for right now, Mothra is a beginning point for a lot of interesting stuff, and we'll get to that in a bit. But that kicked off the 1960s boom in kaiju filmmaking, and Sekizawa, writing-wise, was on the forefront of that, absolutely. And during this time, during the entire decade, and into the 1970s, he's really kind of started out more with Honda, and then he would bounce back and forth between him and Jun Fukuda. And if you remember the list we showed, some of his Honda pictures would be Mothra versus Godzilla, King Kong versus Godzilla, and then Mothra, which we just talked about. And his Fukuda films from that same era would be Sea Monster, Son of Godzilla, and then he worked with Fukuda right up into the 70s with Gigan and Megalon.
Yeah, but the interesting thing, and I didn't know this until we started researching this, not only was he a screenwriter, he was a songwriter.
Yes,
he actually
he was a lyricist.
Yeah, he has co-credit for the lyrics to Mothra song.
Yes.
And I don't remember what it's called, but the ending theme for Godzilla vs. Gigan, one of the few Godzilla March, one of the few bits of original music in it.
The only original music.
He wrote the lyrics.
Yeah, he wrote that and with Fukuda, I believe. They both worked together on that. And same with Mothra, he worked with Honda on that. And there's a whole story that I'm assuming most of you know here. But yeah, if you ever wondered where some of the genius of the Mothra song comes from, a little bit came from his mind. And and again, he bounced back and forth with these two directors. And one interesting one I wanted to highlight, it's up here, Secret of the Telegian, which is a film I actually really like. It's a little bit more obscure. It's one of Toho's mutant trilogy, along with H-Man, and which is a Honda film, and Human Vapor, which is also a Honda film. But the only one of those films that had the Fukuda Sekizawa team working on it was Telegian, and if anybody here knows a little bit about Jun Fukuda as a man, he was very hard on himself. He hated everything he directed. He thought it was all crud. And
He's crazy.
He's crazy because, I mean, he made some wonderfully amazing films, and towards the end of his life, fans in America had to talk him into liking his own stuff. But rather famously, yeah. But Telegian is a film he looked back fondly on. It's one of the few films Fukuda liked, and it's one of the it was his first collaboration with Sekizawa, was that film. And they bounce back and forth, and we mentioned Ghidorah before. That originated from Sekizawa's script for that film. The script, it's a very interesting example, because later on Sekizawa would kind of overstep the writing boundaries, and he would get involved with the effects, which was really, really
He'd
cool.
go on the set where they were filming the monster scenes, and he'd start. Yeah, he was recommending new materials for them to use so that the suits could move better, and the fights would be more energetic.
To better reflect, because if you've ever read any of the Showa Era outlines or scripts, they're kind of rare, but if you ever find one, they're usually described a lot, like, very frenetically. Especially Sekizawa's scripts. They're very, very action-oriented, and sometimes the suits just couldn't do that.
Yeah. Oh, like famously, his description of Ghidorah in the Ghidra script was it 3 heads, 2 tails, and a voice like a bell.
That's right.
That was it. And then Subaraya just went nuts.
Let's go from there. That was literally it. Sekizawa's put a new monster in, 3 heads, 2 tails, voice like a bell, and they gave it to the art department and said, go. And all these years later, Ghidorah is Ghidorah.
And the beard.
And yeah, that's right. And a little bit of stubble down there.
And in some cases, the devil incarnated.
In some cases.
And then, unfortunately, we lost Sekizawa in 1992. That date is pretty short.
That's, yes, November 19th, which is, yeah. It's really, really fascinating.
Interestingly, that would have been a month before Mothra vs. Godzilla in '82.
That's right. He almost, and this is a fun fact, he almost did write what would have been considered a Heisei film. They almost brought him back for one. It was the Legend of the Asuka Fortress script.
But
if
we need to get going, man.
Yeah, we got to get going. We got to get going.
We got to get to Kimura.
We got to get going. So here's a little bit about Kimura. Now this is literally the dictionary definition of opposite.
Yeah,
I would say here. We know his birth date pretty firmly as being February 4th.
Yeah. He's a little older than Sekizawa.
A little older. But again, the date of birth, like the year is a little, we don't quite know. And like Sekizawa, he studied at university, in this case, Kansai University, and he actually may very well have known Tanaka and Takashi Shimura, the actor, while he was there. There's no proof of that, but they were in school at the same time. And rather famously, Kimura was a committed socialist for most of his life.
Yeah, he was a card-carrying member of the Japanese Communist Party.
And then he became the chairman of the Saga Prefecture Communist Party, I want to say in the 1940s. And again, Sekizawa, apolitical comparatively.
Yeah.
Kimura, card-carrying communist. Already, they're very, very opposite people. And as he continued to get writing experience and go on, he would be, I want to say I put infamous on here, that's the right word, for his incredibly dour personality. He was a pessimist from beginning to end. He was just like, he was a hater. He hated
everything.
He hated himself. He hated everyone he worked with. He hated everything he ever wrote. He hated his life. He was just a negative man.
Yeah. The thing that was interesting though was from what some of the sources I've looked at have said, and this seems kind of weird, but the Japanese Communist Party is a little different than how we as Westerners understand Communist Party.
Yeah, it's a little different.
The way I heard it described is that he hated the collective.
Yes.
But he liked individuals. So, for example, the way a video that I looked at said is that he liked Honda, but he hated Toho.
It's a good way to, and if you look at a lot of his scripts, you can see elements of building up an individual at the expense of kind of tearing down the collective in an interesting way. I mean, there's a lot of that in his movies if you know where to look, and we'll get into a couple of those things later on. But if any of you have ever seen a film and wondered, again, I saw a lot of hands go up when we said who looks at the screenwriting credit. Who here has seen a lot of Godzilla films from the period credited to Kaoru Mabuchi? Yeah, does that name sound familiar? That was Takashi Kimura.
That's him.
That was him. He wrote it. That was his
There
pen
came a
name.
point in his career, at which we'll get to. We'll talk
Yes.
about the
Yes.
dividing line. But once you got to the mid '60s, he started writing under a pseudonym because for him, he wrote his masterpiece, and everything after that was just work for hire.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things that separates him from Sekizawa, because Sekizawa loved everything that he wrote. He was always into
He
it.
had fun. He loved giant monster movies. He loved watching them. He loved writing them. He loved the characters. He loved the creatures. He loved the process of doing it, and creating the stories. And he rather famously had a confrontation with Kimura, where Kimura cornered him and said, "You really like writing this crap?" And Sekizawa was like, "Yeah, I totally do." And Kimura's like,
I don't.
End quote. Like that. And that's what he said. And so it's just talk about absolutely diametrically opposite human beings.
Dan, for those of you who might have missed it, that unit, that name he's working for,
Yeah.
that's Carol. If you're not getting it.
Kaoru.
Carol.
That makes sense.
Carol.
Okay.
Carol. Wow. That's interesting. I didn't pick up on that one.
Karu.
Kaoru.
Carol.
Now I'm just gonna call him Carol Mabuchi.
It is unisex.
Well, it's supposed to be, it's a unisex name.
It is it was intentionally made to be a unisex name, so no one would be like, "Oh, it's
Yeah.
definitely Kimura."
Yeah. And as you can tell, the Kimura usually got the more adult,
Yes.
grown-up stories,
More of the gargantuan
the darker stories.
Frankenstein conquers the world. Intriguingly, King Kong escapes.
Well,
doesn't
that's a whole thing.
Can of worms we're not
That's a
opening.
can of worms I don't want to open right
I
now.
love that movie. No, I really do. It sounded like
Yeah.
sarcasm, but I adore that film.
Yeah.
So
but-
which did he
Yeah.
consider his magnum opus?
Matango, which we'll get
Matango.
into a little bit.
We're gonna go.
Let's
We're gonna go.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh
Let's
yeah.
get to the next slide.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, we talked about
We talked about Dower. He didn't make a lot of friends
Yeah.
while he was working.
And then, interestingly, in 1972, he more or less disappeared from the scene. There's no more. He has no more screenwriting credits after 72.
He drops off the map, and we have an interesting idea of at the point that happened, but we'll get to that in a
Yeah.
minute. Again, this is reportedly,
Yeah, reportedly left his wife and daughter.
and then here's where things get a little.
This is weird.
This is
I
disturbing.
found this on IMDb, so I don't know how true this is.
We can't say that this is 100%
But
accurate.
supposedly around 1988, he had another writer who called him up. Oh no, he got a phone call.
Yeah.
He couldn't tell who it was, and then they went to Kimura's apartment and found him dead from asphyxiation.
Oh.
Yes, the gentleman was Toshio Yasumi, who, and again, it's a little bit more obscure, but Toho's The Three Treasures. He's famous for writing other pictures, but that's one of his more famous films. And he was almost like a mentor in a way. He was kind of like the Tezuka that Sekizawa worked with. This was the friend that kind of went along with him. One of the few people that we know he liked. And he got this weird call, and it sounded like someone choking. And it came from Kimura's apartment, and they got there, and he passed away from asphyxiation. And the creepy thing is that supposedly, again, we can't confirm, Kimura predicted his own death in this exact way in 1963.
I'm wondering if that's a reference to Matango.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we'll get into that, but
Yeah.
Kimura didn't have a very favorable view of Tokyo as a city, and it happened in Tokyo.
Yes. Yeah. Which is where he lived.
So we'll do a quick rundown. Questions are for later, man.
Alright, I'm sorry.
You're okay, man.
It's okay. Well, we'll do a quick rundown of their writing styles, but as you can see, very, very polar opposite. Sekizawa was fond of satire and humor and wit. He had sharp dialogue. He was very fond of symbolism, which is one of the things I do want to get into. A lot of people dismiss Sekizawa's scripts as just being
Childish,
fun,
silly.
fluffy things. Sekizawa is a master of symbolism. So you have to dig a little bit deeper, and you have to dig a little bit to see the substance of what he's talking about.
And we picked one film in particular that we think is like really underrated in that regard. We'll get to it. It's going to be interesting. Deceptively Simple.
Yeah.
Deceptively Simple is another interesting one because in his stories are tend to be rather straightforward. You know, character A, character B, they have this interaction, then the monster, things like that. And when you really pay closer attention to it, there's a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of that's about the acting and stuff like that. But definitely, there's a deceptive amount of simplicity because it's a lot more complex than it really seems. And again, we have great character work here. You can tell a Sekizawa character very quickly. if you watch one of those films. And my trick is like when they walk on screen, you can usually pick up pretty fast that you like this person. You know what I mean? Or you don't like this person. You know, there's something going on with them. Mothra vs. Godzilla is the example I always use. Because the minute Akira Takarada gets out of the car, and then Yuriko Hoshi gets out of the car, you know their characters pretty fast, and you're with them for the rest of the movie. That's the Sekizawa touch right there.
Interesting.
And also, I mean, again, if you've seen any of his films, they're very colorful, they're very lighthearted, they're very playful. And he was also, and again, when we talk about Mothra here in a minute, we'll get into it, his intersecting of the monster and human plots was integral in shaping the genre into what
that was
we
what
know.
that was
Yeah.
honestly the greatest contribution
Absolutely.
he made to kaiju storytelling.
Yeah.
His philosophy was not to use that kind of American model where the humans are constantly responding to the monsters. It was more like the humans have their problems, and then the monsters solve them.
Yeah.
So like, to use Ghidorah the three-headed monster for just a quick example. So you have the whole plot with the prophetess with Salno. Sorry. Yeah. So you have that all going on, and then there's all the monster stuff, and then they converge at the end, and it's not the human characters who end up saving Salno from the assassins and all of that. It's the monsters causing an avalanche, and then Malmus catches a rock falling down, which is hilarious. And so that's what solves the problem, ultimately. That was the Sekizawa formula.
He was a terrible sniper anyway.
Shingo had better aim and he had a Walther.
He had the James Bond gun. And then we jump over to Kimura, and again, absolute opposite, serious and straightforward writing style. His stories tend to be very dramatic. I mean, when we get to Matango, I mean, War of the Gargantuans is a good example of how dramatic, especially the last half hour, really, with the build-up. And Frankenstein Conquers the World follows the same thing, too. They tended to be more complex stories, I think. And that's not like a jab at Sekizawa or anything, saying simple versus, being straightforward.
There's a difference between complex and complicated.
Yeah, it's two entirely different styles, and saying one's like better, one that doesn't really. It's just two different styles, really. And
I have this theory that if Sekizawa ever read a Heisei script, his brain would explode. Because Heisei scripts are infinitely more complicated.
They're very complicated. That's true, but that's why we love them. Let's see here. I mean, it's pretty much just like Sekizawa copy and paste the exact opposite to the other side, really.
The one thing though to remark where that we talked about the Sekizawa formula, but for Kimura it was kind of the opposite. He had this very cynical look, unfortunately, toward the audience for these movies, and he got to a point, one of the sources I looked at, where he just felt like, people don't care about the characters in this; they just want the monsters. So he kind of started writing the scripts to cater to that.
There was an interesting kind of battle going on in his writing style where he thought that
You were in the right place.
Navy's on its way, so.
Anyway, let's next slide.
run, right?
Let's talk about Mothra.
All right. For David Khaled, he considers this to be Sekizawa's masterpiece.
And I honestly, I love all of these films pretty much equally, but if someone held a Mount Sniper to my head and said, what is
that would miss you at point blank.
Yeah, it would still miss me, just raise my hair. I'd say Mothra is his masterpiece too, and this next chunk of, we're going to actually pick a film from each of them, and we're going to talk a little bit about what makes it so much them. So Mothra, I think, is really his crowning achievement, because this is the film that took the idea of the Japanese giant monster movie and made kaiju a genre. This is where it started. I mean, it also, we can go back to Godzilla and say that's definitely the beginning point of the entire genre, but, a lot of those early 50s films, which I kind of describe as being the experimental phase, where they touched on a lot of different ideas, it all really coalesced and came together in this film, and this is the kaiju genre, right here. This film has pretty much everything that makes this not just a monster on the loose picture from the 50s in America, like Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, you know what I mean? Full wonderful film, but, it's not a kaiju eiga, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I've got a few notes here. There's a lot we could talk about. We could do a whole panel.
We could do it. We got to rein ourselves in.
Yeah, we're going to rein ourselves in a little bit. So just to kind of highlight some of the trademarks I'm assuming everyone here has probably seen Mothra 100 times at this point. But so you have things like you have his favorite kind of characters. We talked about the reporter. In this case, you have Zen, which one video I looked at actually said if you want to know what kind of a personality Sekizawa had, watch Zen.
Check out Snapping Turtle Fukuda. I love him, man. He's great.
And you notice that he has a very positive opinion of scientists and reporters.
Yes.
Like, he kind of idolizes them in a way because they're always determined to find the truth and do the right thing.
They're, it's the military doesn't have to come in and solve everything. There's usually always like the army is like that's a big thing in American monster films. It's like I get the army involved, but the reporters and scientists were seekers of truth in their own unique, respective ways. And Sekizawa loved that.
Yeah, and Sekizawa's brand of humor is usually very subtle.
Yes.
It's not slapstick in your face. So just to kind of give a few examples, so you have stuff like Chujo is hiding behind a newspaper to hide the fact that he hasn't shaved, or the mouse that gets in Zen's pant leg.
Yes. Really, anything with Frankie Sakai. And it was kind of interesting the way those characters are introduced in that film. You get them pretty much immediately, and they're all kind of hidden behind something. If you think about it, and then you see her face behind the camera. He takes the Fukuda takes the mask off, and then Chujo's behind the newspaper, and you like them immediately, and that's very Sekizawa.
And then his other brand of humor was satire. So you have Clark Nelson. You're a wonderful, wonderful man.
God bless that man.
You're a jerk, but you are a wonderful, wonderful man. He's very over the top. He's it's this over the top foreigner.
Oh yeah.
He kind of borders on a caricature.
He's very
comes very close to a caricature.
He gets kind of Lugosi-esque a couple times. You know what I mean? Especially with the dub.
Yeah, and then you look at when the Shobijin are doing they're forced into doing their show. It's very much mocking celebrity and exploitative show business and stuff like that, and kind of a very kind of like a King Kong 33 kind of.
Oh yeah, it's very Kong 33. Very Kong 33.
Yeah, so then we talked about you had the islands and the lighter tone, and then the symbolism. Yeah, the symbolism. This is where you can really start digging deep into this. So Clark Nelson is from Rolisica, this fictional country. Rolisica is a stand-in for the United States and the Soviet Union.
Right down to the name.
Oh.
Yeah.
Rolisica?
Yeah, kind of. It's it's like a weird portmanteau of both names.
Yes.
Russia, America. And then you have New Kirk City.
Yes.
That one's not as
So that's a
obvious.
little more on the nose. Although it's supposed to be New York, but I've always kind of figured, given I mean, no one knows what the Showa-verse geography looks like, but I kind of like to think that it's more likely a European city. Probably.
It's somewhere.
That's my personal interpretation.
Seems like it.
Yeah, and this was done because, again, he doesn't want to be on the nose about it. He wants to talk about these things, but not in such an obvious way that you could potentially offend somebody.
Yes.
And it's more interesting to do it in this kind of oblique way, because that's what great stories do. They don't preach at you; they present things and get you to think about them. And he was a master at that. And then there's a lot of interesting religious themes going on with Mothra, because you have the glyph for Mothra, and they make it. The glyph is the same, and I think in all the other incarnations.
It's only tweaked a few times. But it's still basically the same cross shape.
Yeah, but it's a cross,
with the little
and which kind of taps into the cycle of life and death and rebirth. And it looks like a church steeple. The characters
There's a lot of Christian imagery and ideas in there, which is interesting because Sekizawa was not a Christian, and he was writing in a country where there weren't a lot of Christians. You know what I mean? So he approached the idea of Christian iconography in almost the same way someone here might approach writing a story that used Shinto iconography in an interesting way with the cross and using the church bells to call Mothra. It's an interesting way of looking at it from the perspective of someone who wasn't a Christian that was writing using those ideas.
And then one last thing I want to touch on before we move on to the next film, because we do have to. We're having too much fun. We're a little behind time right now. But the simplicity of this. The interesting thing about both Mothra and Matango is that they're both actually adaptations of literary works.
This is true.
And in the original story treatment, which is done by the authors, I think it was the authors of the original short story?
The original short story authors, there were three gentlemen that wrote it.
Yeah. And in that, there was this long, complicated mythology surrounding the Shobijin and Mothra. And Sekizawa took pretty much all of it out. And because he said it just slowed everything down. Let's get the story started. Let's not bog it down with all these details.
One of the defining traits of Mothra as a film is that the islanders, the Kaijuvision, Mothra, they're there and you run with it, and it's not explained. And Sekizawa could have taken the easy route and taken all of the exposition from the short story, which involved, gods tearing themselves apart and making like crazy things. It's like this huge convoluted, really interesting story. He could have just copied and pasted it into the script, but he knew that the story, and some stories can be served by exposition, but he knew this one didn't need to be. And so he made the decision. He took, to work, to take it all out. He could have copied and pasted it, but it would have been the easy way. But he took it all out, and it's probably the film's strongest story aspect.
Because I will tell you, I never, even because I didn't see Mothra first, I saw Mothra versus Godzilla first, and there was never a point where I was thinking to myself, I want to know where they came from.
Yeah.
I didn't need it. I just rolled with it.
Good
I didn't
point.
need to know.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
It's always fun to know, but it's not necessary for every film.
All right. On to Kimura. We'll talk about Matango now.
Matango time.
Matango time.
Oh, yes.
Again, I'm just going to kind of skip through this. We'll
let's
get to
go
the
through-
important stuff.
That's right.
So, one of the things that you'll notice in this, and you see this in some of Kimura's other work, is we have our characters and they're all rich.
Yes.
And he is not fond of wealthy people.
Yeah.
Because they go around and they squander their parents' money.
Yes.
That's all they do. And it's very negative and pessimistic about human nature. There's a lot of distrust, there's paranoia.
Mm-hmm.
The group of our 7, they all fall apart. The veneer of civilization just erodes as they go on. They succumb to their baser instincts. Morality is gone, and there's really no heroes or victims here.
No, every one of the characters, we have a lead. Akira Kubo's character is really the lead, and he's kind of positioned as more of a moral high point, but in the end, that doesn't even matter. All of the characters are on equal playing field because all 7 of them are human.
Yeah. And then the thing that I find interesting is that even the things that in another movie and another story might have been kind of cute and kind of fun, there's always this sense of uneasiness about it. So like you have Kumi Mizuno in the opening scene on the boat, and she's a singer, so she's singing. Even that, it doesn't feel right. Something's always a little bit off.
You know something's going to go wrong, almost immediately, and it's like Kimura could have thrown anything happy at the screen, and you'd still be sitting there thinking, oh, it's all going to go wrong.
Yeah.
That's the feeling you get watching this song, and it's a lighthearted moment. She's got the banjo, and she's on the, and the guys are ogling her creepily.
I don't want to get too deep into this, but one of the things I thought was brilliant, and you actually shared this on Kaiju Cast, which I thought was cool.
Yes.
You wrote a feedback about this.
I did.
We have 7 characters, and you said that they've all kind of embodied the 7 deadly sins.
Yes.
We'll get into. Well, I tried to figure out which one was which for each of them, I don't think we
don't have time.
We don't have time
for that. But
it's hard to figure it out.
Watch it from that perspective, and I kind of got a couple of giggles on the show when I wrote that in. But I think it holds water.
And then we talked about, we talked about how Kimura had contempt for the collective. The characters in Matango are always bad-mouthing the human race. They have nothing kind to say about the human race.
Yeah. Or about even each other. And again, you're focusing on groups, and you're not so much building them up, but watching them being torn down slowly as they're insulting the collective behind their back, the rest of humanity.
And then one last thing I do want to pick up on is that there's a flashback scene in this, and it's talking about the writer, and he just says I just rip off other people. I just steal other people's ideas. And I can't help but wonder, looking at that, if that is Kimura's cynical meta-commentary on creative writing. It's just people just stealing ideas from everybody else.
Because the writer's one of the sleaziest characters in the movie.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
He does not represent us.
No. We're not like that.
But this is the one that we dove really deep into this.
Yes.
And this is going to be the hardest one to kind of breeze through.
This one
because we found so many
talk about
deceptively
simple.
Because they did we found that they did collaborate on a couple of things.
Yes.
Like the Sinbad movie, Samurai Pirate.
Samurai
I don't
Pirate.
think either one of us have seen this yet.
I've seen parts of it. It's a harder film to track down.
Yeah.
But
and then they both have story credit for Megalon.
But probably just because of Megalon, the character.
Yeah.
That's what we think
because the name is in his first draft of the script for Gigan. The thing that's annoying is that if you look at the screenwriter credits in Gigan, only Sekizawa's credited. but both of them wrote a draft. And our funny idea for why Kimura vanished after 1972 is I kind of wonder if the fact that he never got screenwriter credit on Gigan, his resentment toward Toho finally hit critical mass.
He was done.
And he was just like, I am done.
Just a theory, but
Conjecture on my part, I have no idea.
It does make sense, and it's interesting because the way that Gigan came about is it was this was right after Hetera, right? And Kimura got burned on Hetera, by the way, because he wrote a draft of Hetera, and then Yoshimitsu Banno came in and said, "Nah," and he just threw it out and wrote the whole thing himself. Because that's why that film, I argue, Hetera is an auteur film. You know what I mean? Because he wrote it, co-wrote it, and directed it, and Kimura was probably not happy about that. And then kind of the same thing happened here. Tomiyuki Tanaka had come back and he was like, okay, that Hetera thing didn't work. We got to get back to the heyday of Godzilla. So they each wrote a draft. He said, Kimura, you write one, Sekizawa, you write one, Sekizawa's got picked.
And then he continued to work on it.
And he continued to work on it. 3 different drafts were ultimately done for the film.
And our theory is that he took a bunch of stuff from Kimura's script and used it in
certain
the
elements.
final shooting script that they used for the film.
Yeah.
You'll notice a lot of elements from both of them in this. So I think the simplest way to put it is that in Gigan, you have Sekizawa heroes fighting Kimura villains.
That's how we broke it down, because if you watch the film, Gengo is a very Sekizawa character. His karate kicking girlfriend, very Sekizawa character. Corncob hippie. I mean, come on, you guys. Like corncob hippie.
Corn job.
Moving on!
We're being riffed. Move your head in front of the screen. It's like they're very character. But then the aliens have this very dark,
very
cynical,
dark. If you really pay attention to what they're talking about, I mean, like, they're essentially digging up corpses for disguises.
Right.
They come from a world where the dominant race destroyed itself. Now the planet's dying. They need a new planet.
which is kind of Mysterian-esque.
Yeah, it's very Mysterian.
And Kimura wrote the Mysterians.
Kimura wrote the Mysterians,
Yeah.
and they're far more interesting and more developed than, say, the Kelogs in Destroy All Monsters.
Which is another Kimura story.
Which there's almost the Kelogs pretty much have nothing to them as characters other than we want your planet.
They shimmer in the right light.
Yeah, as one of my friends put it, they are disco nuns. Yeah.
There's the door. You can.
Yeah. And the other thing that's cool is we're talking about the symbolism. There's a lot of, and I have to thank Khaled again for a lot of this stuff. Sekizawa does some meta commentary in this, kind of on Godzilla as a pop culture icon and on the state of writing. Because by this point, he wasn't even sure if he wanted to keep screenwriting because he said like all the monsters have been done. So you have the thing where Gengo's trying to submit monsters to comic book publishers and they're not taking them, they don't like them. But then he goes to the Nebulans. And they say, "Oh, we'll take your ideas.
We like your shallow monsters
because they're shallow and easy to market." Which I wonder if his was Sekizawa's little way of saying, "This is how people are treating Godzilla now." Because what happens in this movie? You have this commercialized monstrosity in the form of the Godzilla Tower,
And it
nearly kills the real Godzilla.
That if that doesn't reek of symbolism, I don't know what does, folks. I don't want to get like too conspiratorial here, but
But on the other hand, the Kimura elements that we have in here is the Nebulans are very much it touches on globalism. Because by this point, American corporations were penetrating the Japanese market, so they're corporations. So Khaled's argument is that the aliens in this represent American corporations that are breaking in there because they're coming from outside the country. Nobody really knows where they're from. I think Children's Land is from Switzerland. And these guys are cockroaches, which are like corporations. They infest everything, they get everywhere, and you can't kill them.
it's interesting. It's really interesting. I bet some of you didn't think that this film might have been that deep.
Yeah, and also think about this. What are the aliens looking for? Perfect peace.
Perfect peace.
What exactly does that mean? They never really explain it.
Just better than where they came from.
Yeah, better than where they came from. But Khaled's argument was that it was corporate peace.
A very marketable, easy to sell idea. I mean, even in the dubbed version, you hear that. That's a nice ideal. Peace is a nice ideal. It's the idealistic image apiece, a very marketable image apiece. You know, a Godzilla tower you can go into and see fake monsters. They're going to kill the real ones and make facsimiles of the monsters.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And it does fit in with the Japanese Communist Party's view on globalism. As I looked up the Wikipedia on this, and the line that I found is that Wikipedia says the JCP advocates democratic regulation of activities by transnational corporations and international financial capital on an international scale. So they're not fond of foreign corporations.
It all clicks. It all and again, this is speculation, but it really does feel like this is the case. So that's our case for Gigan.
I think Khaled, the way Khaled put it in his book, is that you can describe Godzilla versus Gigan much the same way that the villains describe Gengo, which is he is stupid but cunning.
Stupid, but
I think that's a little harsh, but I would actually argue. I mean, Mothra is obviously Sekizawa's masterpiece, but I do feel like Gigan as a script, not necessarily the movie as a whole, because the movie does suffer from production issues. But I feel like the script might actually be one of Sekizawa's best.
I agree.
And I think it's because of the things he took from Kimura. That's why it's such an interesting mishmash of the two.
Yeah, and then it bled into Megalon because the character Megalon was from one of those early scripts, and I'd argue that Gigan was because the production behind that was crazy. I'd say it was the result of circumstance. But Megalon is the victim of circumstance.
Yeah.
As much as I love that film, they approached it from a similar kind of point of view production-wise, but I think the stronger film is Gigan.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. We need to move
you guys can read on up here if you want to see just their legacy. We've talked about most of this stuff.
We don't have time for questions, unfortunately. It's already.
I'll have time for a few questions. We got about 10 minutes left.
All right.
Let's do a few questions.
I got a quick one.
What's that?
Did Kimura write the words to the words get stuck in my throat in
That I don't know.
Oh, I'd love to think that was him.
Would you like a shirt, sir? Hey, sir.
Did you want a shirt?
Would you like a shirt?
Yeah, you bet.
You want a medium or a large?
Large.
Large?
Explain that one for you.
All right, let's see.
Almost.
You, sir.
He caught it?
You, sir.
This goes to